The transmission arrived without fanfare. No ominous threats, no eerie static, just a crisp, measured voice that spoke in flawless English. This is Supreme Strategist Vorkan of the Zorvith Dominion. Humanity, you have been assessed. Your civilization is inefficient. Your war doctrine's primitive. You are unfit for independent existence. Surrender, and you will be integrated. Resist, and you will be eradicated. The message repeated once before cutting to silence. Inside the UN starship Dauntless, Captain Elena Vasquez stood with her arms crossed, brow furrowed. The bridge crew sat in stunned quiet, as though the alien voice had momentarily stolen their breath. "Hell of a first impression," muttered Sergeant Darnell Dizzy Carter, the ship's combat engineer, twirling a wrench between his fingers. "Could have at least taken us out to dinner first." Elena exhaled through her nose, suppressing a smirk. "Commander Liu, what's our tactical read?" Her XO, Commander Liu, cleared his throat, tapping at his console. The Zorvith fleet outnumbers ours 12-1. Their ships are larger, faster, and have superior weaponry. In other words, a standard Tuesday for us. A soft chuckle ran through the bridge, but the tension lingered like a storm cloud. Dr. Kenji Rao, the ship's chief scientist, leaned forward. "We need more data. How do they fight? What are their weaknesses?" Liu shook his head. "No records. They wipe out any species that resists, erase their history, absorb their technology." Elena set her jaw. "So they assume we'll roll over." "They assume we're idiots," Kenji corrected. "Joke's on them," Dizzy said, grinning. "We're unpredictable idiots." Humanity's first lesson in Zorvith warfare. The first attack came within the hour. The Zorvith fleet descended on the outer colonies like an avalanche, unstoppable, merciless. Entire orbital defenses collapsed within minutes. Their ships moved with mathematical precision, their formations rigid yet devastating. Elena watched the battle unfold from the dauntless bridge, fists clenched. The UN Athens, a heavy cruiser, attempted to outmaneuver its attackers, but was boxed in by Zorvith dreadnoughts. Their weapons struck in perfect synchronization. One moment, the Athens stood defiant. The next, it was molten debris. Elena turned away from a viewport. "How are we holding?" Kenji grimaced. "Their targeting systems are predictive. They're guessing our next move before we even make it." Liu swore under his breath. "They fight like machines." Elena pressed her lips together. "Then we stop fighting like machines." She turned to Anya Petrov, the ship's historian, who had been watching the tactical displays in silence. "Anya, you ever seen anything like this?" The young woman nodded, eyes gleaming with recognition. "The Battle of Cannae, 216 BC. The Carthaginians lured the Romans into a predictable advance, then surrounded them." Elena's mind word. "So, if the Zorvith expect us to behave in a predictable way, we make a move that defies their calculations," Anya finished. Dizzy cracked his knuckles. "Time to get weird." An unconventional counterattack. The Dauntless broke formation. Instead of retreating like the rest of the fleet, it charged straight at the enemy, juking erratically, burning thrusters in patterns that made no logical sense. The Zorvith hesitated. Their AI-driven tactics depended on predictability. Humans did not cooperate. "Fire the chaff mines," Elena ordered. Kenji flipped the switch. The ship ejected dozens of makeshift decoys, sending back false signals that mimic human warships. The Zorvith's targeting systems faltered for a split second, just enough for a counterattack. Across the battlefield, human forces began adopting unconventional maneuvers, sporadic, irregular flight paths, attacks that shouldn't have worked, but did. And suddenly, the invincible Zorvith were struggling. But it wasn't enough. The victory was fleeting. The Zorvith adapted fast. They recalibrated their AI, adjusted their targeting systems. Elena, Liu called voice grim, their learning. On the view screen, a fresh wave of Zorvith reinforcements arrived. One after another, the human ships flickered out of existence under their merciless barrage. The Dauntless shuddered. Alarms blared. Kenji's console sparked. Shields down to 18%. Evasive maneuvers. Elena barked. Dizzy's fingers flew over his controls, forcing the ship into a barely controlled spiral through enemy fire. Remind me why I agreed to this job. Because you owe me money, Elena shot back. Dizzy grinned. Oh, right. But levity couldn't change the inevitable. The Zorvith were relentless. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was a massacre. Elena took a slow breath. Commander Liu, send a retreat order. Liu hesitated, jaw tight, then nodded. Across the fleet, the surviving ships began pulling away. Some wouldn't make it. Elena turned her eyes to the wreckage. Humanity's first, humiliating defeat. The Zorvith had won. For now, the Zorvith thought the war was over. As the shattered remnants of Earth's fleet limped into hiding, Supreme Strategist Vorken delivered a final transmission. Your resistance was statistical noise, nothing more. Your existence is concluded. But humanity was not finished. A desperate refuge. The Yuyan Dauntless and its surviving allies huddled in the shadow of Kessler 9, a derelict asteroid station long abandoned by human colonists. It was old, half-collapsed, and barely habitable, which made it perfect. The Zorvith wouldn't even consider searching for survivors in such an inefficient, decaying structure. Captain Elena Vasquez stood in the station's dimly lit command center, arms folded, jaw tight. The air smelled of metal and oil, the hum of life support barely masking the silence. We need a new strategy, she said. We can't match their firepower. We need to outthink them. That shouldn't be hard. Sergeant Darnell Dizzy Carter quipped from his makeshift workstation, where he was using spare ship parts, duct tape, and a coffee mug to modify a stolen Zorvith drone. They relied too much on logic. No room for creativity. They don't understand us, added Dr. Kenji Rao, rubbing his temples. Every battle they fought has been against species that follow predictable patterns, species that adapt too slowly. Elena turned to Anya Petrov, who was flipping through an old tablet filled with historical battle records. We need to hit them in a way they won't expect. Anya nodded. Then we need to think like the underdog, rewriting the rules of war. Over the next few weeks, the survivors got to work. They didn't build bigger guns or stronger shields. They built tricks. Kenji hacked into Zorvith communication relays, feeding them false fleet movements. The enemy's ultralogical minds assumed the data was real, because no species had ever dared to lie to them before. Dizzy rigged scrap metal and old reactors into decoy ships, broadcasting human distress signals. When Zorvith forces moved to engage, they found nothing but floating wreckage, right before hidden mines detonated. Anya scoured human history for asymmetric warfare tactics, everything from Hannibal's feints to Cold War disinformation. Elena coordinated it all, leading precision hit-and-run raids against isolated Zorvith supply lines. The first victory. It started small. A Zorvith patrol ship detected an unauthorized energy signature near an asteroid belt. Tactical AI determined a 0.03% probability of a human ambush. Irrelevant. They moved in. The ship drifted closer, scanning for survivors. Nothing. Then, suddenly, its sensors flickered. 1,000 false echoes flooded its systems. Then came the explosives. A cluster of magnetized mines latched onto the hull, tearing through its armor. The Zorvith vessel imploded, its wreckage spiraling into the void. The entire battle had taken 12 seconds. It was humanity's first true victory. The Zorvith's confusion. Supreme Strategist Vorken analyzed the loss with cold detachment. Anomalous engagement detected. Human tactics deviate from predictive models. More incidents followed. Zorvith ships found themselves lured into asteroid fields, trapped by false distress signals, and ambushed by impossibly reckless human pilots. They were fighting an enemy that refused to play by the rules. The turning point. Elena gathered her team in the station's dimly lit briefing room. A holographic map flickered, showing supply routes leading directly to a Zorvith forward base. We hit them here, she said, pointing to the weakest link in the chain. A full assault would be suicide, but if we make them believe their fleet is compromised. Dizzy grinned. You mean bluff them into retreating? Kenji leaned forward, eyes gleaming. They don't understand deception. If we feed them falsified data, convince them that their base has been infiltrated. Anya tapped her screen. like the D-Day Ghost Army. Convince them they're facing an invasion when there's nothing there at all. Elena smiled. Let's see if they can handle a little human imagination. The Zorvith didn't retreat. Not at first. Despite their confusion over humanity's erratic tactics, Supreme Strategist Vorkan maintained confidence in the Dominion's overwhelming superiority. No species had ever truly threatened their rule, and humans, while more difficult to predict, were no exception. That assumption would be their undoing. Laying the trap. In the dimly lit war room of the Kessler 9 station, Captain Elena Vasquez stood before a holographic display, her expression grim. The Zorvith supply hub at Delta 447 was their next target. It was heavily fortified, but if the humans could make the Zorvith believe the station had already been compromised. We won't attack the station directly, Elena said, turning to her crew. We'll make them abandon it themselves. Kenji Rao smirked, already working through the logistics. You want a phantom fleet, fabricated distress calls, falsified Zorvith signals, and enough electronic noise to make them think their base is overrun. Dizzy Carter gave a low whistle. A war without a war. I like it. Anya Petrov leaned forward, tapping on her data tablet. Psychological warfare. The Allies used similar tactics in World War II. Dummy tanks. Fake radio chatter. If we make them believe their defenses are compromised, they'll panic. Elena nodded. Kenji, you handle the digital deception. Dizzy, I want physical decoys, hacked drones, scavenged ships, anything that looks threatening. Dizzy grinned. I've got just the thing. The Ghost Army. The plan unfolded over 3 tense days. Kenji's virus infiltrated Zorvith communications, simulating the presence of a massive human fleet inbound for Delta 447. False distress calls echoed through Zorvith channels. Fabricated reports of infiltrators, sabotage, internal betrayals. At the same time, Dizzy's engineers dressed up old freighters and mining rigs with makeshift heat signatures and electromagnetic interference, creating the illusion of a battle-ready armada. From the Zorvith perspective, Delta 447 was doomed. The first cracks in the armor. Vorkan reviewed the incoming reports, his mandibles clicking in irritation. Impossible, he muttered. Human forces are scattered. They lack the numbers for an organized assault. Yet the data was undeniable. Zorvith officers were reporting sightings of cloaked human vessels, sabotage within the station, and sudden power fluctuations. Panic spread through the base. Officers, untrained in deception, began seeing threats where none existed. They requested retreat. But Vorkan wasn't ready to surrender. He needed proof. The wild card move. On the final day, a single human vessel emerged from hiding. Not a warship, not a fleet, just one stolen Zorvith corvette, running hot, flying directly toward the station. Inside, Dizzy Carter sat at the controls, grinning like a lunatic. This is either the best idea I've ever had, he muttered to himself, or my last one. He slammed the throttle forward. Zorvith forces scrambled. To their sensors, Dizzy's ship read as compromised. A human vessel piloting a stolen corvette, broadcasting fake distress codes, signaling that Zorvith defenses had been breached. Dizzy's ship spun wildly as he activated its hacked self-destruct warning systems. Warning: reactor breach imminent. Total core detonation in 60 seconds. Zorvith officers, already paranoid, assumed the worst. Within minutes, the entire station went into emergency evacuation. Victory without firing a shot. Elena watched from Kessler 9 as the Zorvith abandoned Delta 447, retreating to their fleet. She exhaled. They ran. Kenji leaned back, exhausted but triumphant. They didn't even bother to check if the invasion was real. Anya smiled. They couldn't. They don't think like us. Dizzy's corvette came limping back, engines fried, but the gambit had worked. For the first time, humanity had taken something back, and the war was about to change. Supreme Strategist Vorkan stood in silence, his mandibles tightening. The loss of Delta 447 wasn't just a tactical setback. It was an anomaly. Humans weren't supposed to be capable of strategic deception. Their ships were weak, their numbers inferior, their technology outdated. Yet, against all probability, the Zorvith had been outmaneuvered, outwitted and outfought. For the first time in his career, Vorkan felt something akin to doubt. "Adjust the predictive models," he ordered coldly. "Humans are not as simple as we believed." But it was already too late. The war spreads. The loss of Delta. 447 sent ripples through the Dominion. Other human forces, emboldened by the victory, began adopting similar tactics. Decoy fleets, electronic warfare, misinformation campaigns, all things the Zorvith had no defense against. Kenji Rao's AI-driven false signals sent entire Zorvith battalions chasing phantom threats. Dizzy Carter's jury-rigged explosives turned abandoned mining rigs into floating death traps. Elena Vasquez's hit-and-run tactics dismantled supply chains, leaving once mighty Zorvith warships stranded without fuel or reinforcements. Every battle took a toll. The Zorvith were still stronger, but strength meant nothing if you couldn't trust your own eyes. The fatal mistake. Desperation made the Zorvith reckless. Vorkan, now fully aware of humanity's cunning, ordered an all-out assault on Earth itself. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that Earth had never been the target. Kenji intercepted the invasion orders, feeding false navigational data into the Zorvith warship systems. Instead of striking at Earth, the entire Zorvith fleet jumped into the heart of a collapsing neutron star. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. Half their fleet was obliterated. The last stand, the final battle, took place in orbit over Zorvith Prime. The once invincible Zorvith forces were in disarray. Tacticians second-guessing themselves, fleets hesitant to engage, commanders paranoid that every distress call was another trick. And that's when humanity struck the killing blow. Elena's fleet attacked from all directions, overwhelming what remained of the Zorvith defenses. Dizzy led a team of infiltrators who hacked planetary shields, turning them against their own warships. When the dust settled, Zorvith Prime surrendered. For the first time in their history, the Zorvith Dominion had been conquered. The end of an empire. Vorkan, once the supreme strategist of an unstoppable empire, now stood in the ruins of his own war room. He gazed at the human delegation, Elena, Kenji, Anya, and Dizzy, standing before him. He exhaled slowly, mandibles twitching. "You were unpredictable." Elena smirked. "Yeah, we get that a lot." Humanity had won, but not because of superior firepower, not because of numbers. Because the Zorvith had underestimated the one thing that made humans truly dangerous: imagination.